Welcome to this edition of Rattling the Bars. I'm your host, Mansa Musa. Last year, incarcerated farmland workers at Louisiana State Penitentiary filed a lawsuit for better working conditions. Louisiana State Penitentiary is commonly called Angola. In the suit, the prisoners was alleging that the conditions they are now working under are so inhumane that between the heat and the inadequate prevention from the heat caused them to suffer massive heat strokes or just can't continue to work. If they don't work, though, however, under these conditions, then they're threatened with either being put in solitary confinement. If they don't meet the quota that they're given, they're threatened with solitary confinement. If they quit, they're threatened with solitary confinement. Leading up to the high heat conditions of this summer, their attorney filed a mercy appeal in hopes of seeing some of the reforms out of the litigation. Here with us today is one of the plaintiff's attorneys, Samantha Pourciau, who is a senior staff attorney with the Promise of Justice Initiative in New Orleans. Thank you for joining me today, Samantha.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so as you see, I'll unpack some of the things that's going on. So we know that, one, the conditions in Angola prison, Louisiana State Penitentiary, we know that the work conditions as it relates to the farmland is inhumane and causes massive health problems for the workers. We know that from looking at the litigation in and of itself, that the threat of not working is real, and either you won't work or you go into solitary confinement. But more importantly, introduce yourself to our audience and then give us some insight to what's going on with the lawsuit.
Sure. My name is Samantha Pourciau. I'm a senior staff attorney at the Promise of Justice Initiative, where we represent VOTE, which stands for Voice of the Experienced, as an associational plaintiff in this lawsuit, in addition to 7 individual incarcerated men in Angola who are seeking to represent a class of all individuals incarcerated at Angola who currently are or may in the future be assigned to the farm line. And so the crux of the lawsuit is to get at the inhumanity of what's known as the farm line, which is the forced labor in the fields of Angola, which are known as the vegetable picking lines, where mostly Black men are forced to use their hands to pick, to weed, to water vegetables, to harvest vegetables. And it's called a work assignment, but at the heart of the lawsuit is the fact that it isn't really a job. It is distinct from other work and other job assignments at the prison. It is used basically as a tool of social and punitive control. It's the first job assignment most people are given, and it is our understanding that it is the first job assignment to essentially break people and train them into realizing that they no longer have autonomy over their physical body, because if they stop to break when they no longer can physically labor, they are, as you mentioned, liable to be written up and sent to solitary confinement. So it's used at the entrance of one's time at Angola to train into how one needs to behave in order to make their way in the prison system. And then over time, people often get off the farm line and get other job assignments that are safer, that are compensated more, that are perhaps more meaningful, and an ability to learn a trade and learn a skill that could be used if someone were released in the free world. And then at the end of the day, they could be sent back to the farm line if they get a disciplinary write-up. And so there's the threat always of the farm line being sent back to the farm line as a tool that kind of used to keep people in line in how the prison wants them to behave.
And so even by your own acknowledgement that, so the institution is basically using the farm line as a form of control for the prison population, in terms of, like, when you come in, you're gonna find yourself on the farm line if you meet the security criteria or whatever the case may be, or you meet the need of labor, you're gonna find yourself on the farm line. But answer this question. Okay, so Angola been in existence forever. This practice of the farm line has always been in existence. You go back and look at some footage from the 30s, you go back and look at some footage from the 40s. Any period, you're gonna always find that the agro aspect of Angola has always existed. So why now do they bring this litigation when this practice been going on forever? What made the prisoners to come to this point where they feel like it's now that they have to do this, or have they, and to your knowledge, had they filed previous litigation that just wasn't successful, and this is a continuum of their advocacy?
I think people have always fought against the farm line in the ways that they've had the ability to, by choosing to not work, even knowing that it was going to put them in solitary confinement. Decades ago, there was a protest where people cut their Achilles tendon in protest of being forced to work in the field. We aren't aware of any litigation on this issue prior to the instant lawsuit, but I think that over the past decade or two, criminal justice reform has become more widespread. The public understands that not everything that happens in our prison system is okay. And there is, I think, more openness to examining that. And there is also more openness into learning and tying the direct through line between U.S. chattel slavery and our current system of mass incarceration. We saw The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander really was the first big text that came out that educated the public about that connection and how our current system of mass incarceration is the new Jim Crow. And so I think that now is the time for the courts to hear this argument, to understand that the farm line is operating on top of a former plantation. The Louisiana State Penitentiary was a plantation. It's known as Angola because the plantation owner thought that the best slaves came from that country in Africa. And so this litigation really seeks to connect the dots and talk about how part of the psychological harm and the dignitary harm of the farm line is that it is purposefully simulating chattel slavery. And I think the public and the courts are ready to hear about that. I don't know that I don't think the case law has been established on that point, but this is a landmark case seeking to make that argument and show that it is cruel and unusual punishment to force people to basically replicate chattel slavery on the grounds of a former plantation.
Right. And okay, so let's unpack some of the things that goes on the farm line. How much money are they being given? What's the rate? And two, do they get days off? What's the hours that they work? And more importantly, do they have the right, if they are sick, do they take that and arbitrarily say they're trying to get off the farm line and put them in solitary confinement? In your investigation, have you noticed the abuses, like to the extent where you don't have a right to nothing other than come out, go to work, and go back into your cell?
So on the issue of pay, when someone first enters the prison system, they aren't paid anything at all. And because the farm line is the first work assignment for the majority of people, that means for the most part, when people start working on the farm line, they receive no pay at all. Eventually, they can start earning between 2 and 4 cents per hour. It tops at 4 cents an hour, so no one on the farm line will be making more than that. And in terms of the hours that people are forced to labor, they usually work call at around 7 a.m. and line them up out the gate to bring them to the field starting around 7:30 or 8 a.m. in the morning. In the past, there were 2 shifts in the morning and in the afternoon. Since we started this litigation, they've not been bringing out the afternoon shift in the summer in recognition that it is dangerously high heat during that time. That isn't technically in their policy, that they don't need to do that. And so that is part of what an argument we make in the litigation, that all of the changes that they have been making in response to this litigation need to be documented in their policy so that they don't just change them back if the lawsuit is over. But they work a full day during the non-summer, and then during the summer months, it's usually a half of a shift. In terms of I think you were asking about medical care.
Right. And what type of, because we already, it's evident that they want to make sure that the men are always working, and the threat of not working is solitary confinement. But I want to know, in your investigation, have you seen where people have actually had medical problems, but they still was forced to go out there and work? or do they allot for a person to say, I got a medical condition, I can't work this day, or I'm unable to work at all, even though I might have been working like a month?
So the men are able to make what's called a self-declared emergency in the field if they are saying they can't work because they're having some medical issue, and a medical provider will come out to assess them. What we've seen is that the majority of people who make those sick calls, one, are charged for them. It's not free. It's supposed to be free under their policy if it's an illness related to your work assignment, but we haven't been able to get any evidence to show that they are actually categorizing these kinds of sick calls as related to work assignment. And so people know that when they call for that medical call, they are liable to get charged for it. And so even if they end up not charging them at the end of the day, that is a barrier to calling for sick call when you make 4 cents an hour at most, and the sick call costs $2.
Yeah.
And so they can make a sick call, and if the provider comes out and believes them, then they don't have to continue working. But in the majority of cases, we've seen the notes reflect that the person was assessed and the provider said they were fine and they could just take a quick break and then go back to work.
Yeah.
And it does seem like the mentality of the providers is to get people back to work and not to issue what's known as a duty status that it can accommodate some issue that they're having, so they aren't forced to go out and work.
So they in cahoots. All right, talk about the products. Where do the produce go that they manufacture? Do they go to feed the prisoners? Do they go to feed the guards? Or are they being sold in society, or is it a combination of all three?
So the farmland that's the subject of the litigation, the prison's stance is that it only goes to feed the people in prison. It's not sold on the open market. There are other agricultural operations at Angola that are run by the Department of Corrections for-profit branch known as prison enterprises, and those are more commonly sold crops on the open market that usually are used for animal feed. And so that's the market that they're looking into. For the farm line, it's all vegetables that are harvested that are used in the kitchens at the prison. There's a processing facility that it's sent to on site that other incarcerated people work to freeze some of that to build up a storage for over the winter months. But we've also heard reports of some of the produce going to the guards. There's a area at Angola known as the B line, which is also very reminiscent of its plantation history. It's a section of the prison where people who work there can live, and they have homes, parks, recreation centers. I think at one point they had a school. I don't think it's operating currently. And there are reports that the B-line folks can access the food that is harvested on the farm line, though we haven't discovered that in this litigation yet.
First of all, did they get class status? Did it get certified as a class action, or is it still the 7 plaintiffs and whoever else was in there? And second, what are they asking for? If you can list some of their demands or their cause of actions?
Sure. So the case has not yet been certified as a class action. We just had last month, from April 22nd to 24th, a 3-day evidentiary hearing for the court to hear evidence about why we believe it should be a class action. And the court has asked for us to summarize and put in writing post that hearing why it should be certified, which will be due on June 2nd, 2025. So we hope and anticipate that the court will make a ruling on that during the summer of 2025. And the ability to make it a class action obviously has a huge change of the relief we can seek in that case. Although we do have an associational plaintiff vote, which stands for Voice of the Experience. They're a local nonprofit advocacy organization in Louisiana founded by formerly incarcerated people from Angola. And so even if for some reason the class isn't certified, they still represent their members who are currently incarcerated at Angola, and so we still can seek relief on behalf of a group of people. But we hope that the court will certify the class this summer. In terms of the relief that we are seeking, the case is broken down into two primary claims. We have an Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment claim, and within that, we have theories of harm related to the heat, and then we have theories of harm related to the psychological harm and dignitary harm that is happening on the farmland all of the time, not just in the summer.
Right.
And then the second claim we have in the case is that the operation of the farmland violates the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, and that is on behalf of a subclass, and a number, not all 7 of the named plaintiffs fit into that category, but some of them do. And that is for folks who have medical conditions or prescribed medications that make them even more susceptible to heat illness. And so we are asking the prison to provide further accommodations for them to be brought in once the heat index reaches 88 degrees,
Right.
and to be given what the prison calls a heat precaution duty status. So those are some of the specific reliefs we're requesting.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm listening to what you're saying, and I recall I did 48 years in prison prior to getting out. But in the summertime and in the wintertime, they had the heat index. They wouldn't let us go outside if it was a certain degree. It was automatic that yard was suspended because of the heat. And then in the wintertime, same thing, if the temperature dropped below a certain degree, we couldn't go out. This was something that was state regulated. But they don't, according to you, do they have that same mechanism? Do they have a heat indicator that say that, under these conditions, can't nobody go out in the yard or work? Or they do the exclusion or exception when it comes to the farmland?
So before we filed the lawsuit, there was no upper limit when they would not make people go out to work in the high heat. Because of the litigation, the prison has updated their what they call the heat pathology policy, and they have created that upper limit of 113 degree heat index. We think that's far too high. And so we are seeking for that number to be brought down to 103 degrees, which is still very high, but within the scientific literature is a more reasonable number that we think would provide safety and take down the risk of harm that people would have being forced to go out at that high heat. In terms of a lower limit, the prison has said that they don't send folks out if it's below freezing, but that isn't written anywhere in policy. So that is also something we would want them to put in policy, to put in writing.
To your knowledge, is this something that y'all would want to include? Did they be given minimum wage for the work that they do on the farmland? This is the reality of prison. Prison's going to work. Prisons want to work. They give, in prison, they give different incentives to work. Unlike Louisiana, like in Maryland, they give you incentives, and you working just as inhumane conditions as anybody else. But they give you, the incentive is that you get an extra 5 days off your sentence a month. I can break that down to like less than 4.5 years or 4 years or 3.5 years. So, and I'm saying all that to say, if the litigation is survived, and y'all get the relief that y'all want, will it eliminate the farmland, or will it make the farmland give it more regulatory, which would be like still up to them to enforce the regulation? Talk about that.
Yeah, we are seeking an end to the farmland.
Okay.
Because of the non-heat related claims, the claims around the psychological harm and the dignitary harm. We think there really isn't a way to reform the farmland. It is a vestige of U.S. chattel slavery that just needs to end. And so that's the relief we are seeking. I can speak to the Louisiana incentive pay system if you want to hear about that, but we aren't seeking a change in the incentive pay on the farmland. And part of that is based in the claims that we are bringing, and then also part of that is in the ability to succeed on those types of claims, because the reality is the 13th Amendment exception clause makes it so that you don't have to pay anything to incarcerated workers. And so the incentive pay system that exists in Louisiana today is designated by statute, and it would be legally very hard to be found unconstitutional because it is above nothing. And for that reason, we aren't attacking the incentive pay system directly. We are attacking the overall farm line and how it operates within the system, and the lack of compensation beyond pennies is a part of how it works as a whole, but we aren't attacking that specific provision within the lawsuit.
Oh, and that rightly so, right? Because like slavery by any other name is slavery, and they use the 13th Amendment to rationalize and justify getting slave labor out of us without giving us dignity and wage. But talk about the status of the case now. Did y'all file a TRO, a temporary restraining order? And what's the status of the temporary restraining order?
Yeah, so we filed a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction last summer in advance of the high heat season, and we were able to get it granted in part. We had asked for the court to just to order the prison to bring in the farm line anytime the heat reached or exceeded 88 degrees. And the court did not go that far, but he ordered the prison to put up shade structures, make sure that there were more frequent and longer breaks, make sure that they had access to water at all times, things like that, that we don't think go far enough, but were something more than what they were currently getting. And so then in advance of this next heat season, summer 2025, we filed a second preliminary injunction and temporary restraining order asking for some of those same things, but also different things, because in the intervening time, the prison has changed their heat pathology policy. In some ways, for the better, they've expanded the list of medications and medical conditions that would give someone a heat precaution duty status, which would allow them to be brought in once the heat gets too high. But unfortunately, the prison has also increased the heat index threshold that allows for folks to come inside and allows for all of those protections to kick in. So it used to be 88 degrees. Now it's 91. And so we are seeking for this current summer for that number to go back down, and for some other relief that can make it better for this coming summer before we're able to get to trial and get a final judgment on the merits in this case.
And I think for the benefit of our audience, we're saying like 90, 81 degrees, 92 degrees. But the reality is that the person is not out there one day. The person is out there every day. When the sun come up, they're out there every day under these arduous and inhumane conditions. So it's not a matter like, oh, well, it's 91 degrees out here today, don't let them work. They're working all the time in these inhumane and heat-related conditions. But talk about this if you can. The plaintiffs and the expert compared the farmland to chattel slavery and Nazi concentration camp. So they basically saying that the same way the Nazis inflicted chattel slavery on Jews, the same way people in this country inflicted slavery on Black people, that it's a comparison to that and Nazi Germany. To your knowledge, can you expand on that, or do you see any semblance to that, or is that just like beating the drum real loud to try to get attention to the issue, for lack of a better word?
So Dr. Hammonds is one of our expert witnesses in the case, and she is a professor at Harvard who studies African-American history, American history, the history of science and the history of medicine, epidemiology. And she was the one who testified at our class certification hearing about the comparison between the farm line and U.S. chattel slavery and the farm line and Nazi Germany. And the parallels she was drawing specifically, I think U.S. chattel slavery is very easy for everyone to understand and see. Right. It is the modern day version of slavery, what is happening on the farm line. I think the Nazi Germany comparison requires some more explanation, and so I'm happy to provide that. What she was opining about was the way the medical care operated within the concentration camps, and how there were medical providers, but all of the medical treatment was really focused on getting people back to work. And she was talking about in the labor camps how the medical providers were not assessing a person to really get at the illness or what medical ailment they were having, but was trying to get them back to labor. And so she had reviewed deposition transcripts from the case where we deposed some of the medical providers at Angola, and she saw similar characteristics of the medical providers opining that most of the incarcerated people lie about their sickness and they're really just trying to get out of work and they're not truthfully coming to them with the medical issue. And so she was drawing that comparison of the tendency to not believe people and to just focus on wanting to get them back to work and thinking that they were only complaining to get out of work was the comparison she was drawing that she saw in her review of the evidence in this case.
And that right there in and of itself is a powerful testament to the severity of the farmland, because we know from our history that in Nazi Germany, everybody was complicit with the regime. It wasn't a matter of like, I'm in this space and I got an opinion on how these people should be treated. I'm complicit. I'm in compliance with everything that we're doing. Here, the attitude, and when you first said it, I reflected on how the medical systems in prison are not, most of them are private contract. They didn't became privatized. So most of them get contracts, and in order to maintain their contracts, they have to provide a certain amount of services. But when they bid, they underbid to get the lowest possible service to us. And so when this entity come in play, very rarely do you find the medical gonna go against the prison administration or the Department of Corrections, because they get their monies from them. It's not, you're not a part of the state. When you was a part of the state, then it was a different thing, because now you had a different standard that you could track and say, well, this is this is the farmland, the medical, the ward, and everybody associated with it. Here, you have a private medical institution got going from prison to prison to prison throughout the United States. And as they got sued and they left, they got kicked out, they just went to another and they swapped out like that. So it'll be interesting to see who is responsible for this. But talk about the status of the case, and I get off my soapbox, but talk about the status of the case right now, Samantha.
So right now we are awaiting a ruling on that second preliminary injunction and temporary restraining order for the summer of 2025. And we just submitted our post-argument briefing on Friday, May 16th. And so now the court has all of the briefing it has requested and hopefully should be making a ruling any day, hopefully today, so we can get some relief, because we are in the height of the heat season. Mm-hmm. The temperature this past weekend in Louisiana exceeded 100 degrees on the real field heat index, and we're really getting to the point where it's getting dangerous for folks to be out there. And so we're hoping the court rules imminently and grants us some temporary relief while we are continuing to work on a final judgment in this case related to ending the farm line generally, because of its psychological and dignitary harm for those who are forced to labor on it at all times, at all seasons. And so we're awaiting that ruling. And then, as I mentioned, we are still awaiting a ruling on whether the class action can proceed as a class action, not just on behalf of individuals and the associational plaintiff vote. And so we expect that ruling to come through at the end of this summer. And then once that ruling comes through, the court will implement a new scheduling order and hopefully set a trial date for probably 2026, but we're awaiting when that will happen.
Is there anything else that that we did not cover that you would like our viewers to know?
I just feel like I always want to lift up our clients who we represent. I get to be here and talk about the case because I am an attorney and I am non-incarcerated, but I wish it could be them that we're talking about the case, and
Right.
Mr. Damaris Jackson, one of the named plaintiffs, was able to come for the class certification hearing for the 3 days we were in court and sit at counsel table and participate and he testify. And it was the first time the court was able to hear directly from an incarcerated person forced to labor on the farm line. And that changes how one thinks about this when you can hear about it directly from the person experiencing it. So even creating that opportunity to allow incarcerated folks to come out to the public, to the courtroom, to a public space, and tell everyone what is happening in these places where we try to disappear people. Angola is 2.5 hours away from New Orleans. It's in a remote location that is hard to access. It's at the end of a very long rural road that you have no cell phone reception when you're going up there. And so I think getting folks outside of that and into the public to talk about the truth of what we're doing, this modern day slavery, is essential.
Yeah. And how do our audience stay in touch or get more information or be able to track this if they want to stay on top of it and insert themselves in like whatever advocacy y'all are soliciting from people?
Yeah, I would recommend that folks sign up for the Promise of Justice Initiative's newsletter. If you go to promiseofjustice.org on our website, you can sign up there and then follow us on social media to get updates as they're coming out. Justice Promise is our tag on Instagram. And you can find us on Facebook and Blue Sky and X. And that's where we'll post live updates as they're happening.
Thank you, Samantha. Samantha Pourciau, you rattled them bars today. We can hear the bars coming loose and the voices of those that are incarcerated or in prison or in chattel slavery. We can hear their voices being echoed through you. So we take heart at that, and we recognize what you're saying, that it would be more appealing to have the people that's suffering this to be present. But at the same token, if we don't have people like yourself, we ain't have William Kunstler, we ain't have Charles Garrett, we ain't have Thurgood Marshall, and we ain't have people like yourselves in this space willing to go like to Angola, willing to like ensure that the information is being gathered and presented to the court, willing to pursue justice at all costs. If we didn't have this, then we would be this what we would have. We would have a farmland, a graveyard, and laws coming out to ensure that you have endless slave labor. So we thank you for that. We ask our audience to continue to support and Rattling the Bars in the Real News. We ask that you support us by giving your feedback on these type of podcasts or these type of interviews that we conduct. If you have an opinion about chattel slavery, if you have an opinion about slavery, if you have an opinion about concentration camps being ran in the United States under our species of being a prison, and if you have an opinion about genocide, if you have an opinion about anything relative to social conditions and injustice, then we ask that you give us your views and give us your feedback. It's important for us to hear these things because your views are what help us shape the direction we're going in terms of educating and exposing information. We don't give you voice, we just turn up the volume on your voice.